Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Facebook Live. We have a wonderful panel to discuss today the coronavirus and the vaccines to prevent coronavirus. We are very, very happy to have a panel of experts, and we're here to answer your questions. I will briefly introduce each of the panelists. And then I will be asking questions. My name is Kim Hikimian. I have a background in public health. I have worked both here and in Armenia, and I am on faculty at Columbia University at the Institute of Human Nutrition and at the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons in the program for education in global and population health. With us today, we are very lucky to have Dr. Tsolin Kocaoğlanyan. Dr. Kocaoğlanyan is board certified in infectious disease and pediatrics, and she is on staff at the Maimonides Children's Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. We also have with us today Dr. John Bilizikian. He is a professor of medicine and endocrinology. He is the chief emeritus at the Department of Endocrinology at Columbia University, where he also is the director of the metabolic bone diseases program there, and he is the vice chair for international education and research for the Department of Medicine at Columbia University. In addition, today we have Karine Shinorokian. Karine is the regional director of case management and clinical integration for Care One. Her background is in nursing and in nurse leadership, and she will be with us today to describe her experiences with the older adult population in nursing homes and rehab. And rounding out our panel today is Dr. Larry Najarian, who is board certified in ophthalmology and a clinical assistant professor at NYU Medical School in New York, with offices in New Jersey. So I would like to jump in right away and start our questions. And I will be asking 2 rounds of questions of each of these esteemed panelists. And then we will be opening the forum to you, the audience, for your questions. And we welcome any questions that you have about the vaccines moving forward. Before I start the first question, I would just like to say that we are 1 year in to the pandemic. And yet we still have 1,500 deaths per day in the United States from the coronavirus. We today are going to be focusing our discussion about vaccines because vaccines is one of the public health tools that we can take to protect ourselves and to protect our loved ones. In addition to vaccines, however, we have evidence-based background and understanding of other public health measures that we know that can keep us safe and keep our loved ones safe as well. And that includes continued mask wearing a particularly good mask, double masks, and masks that fit the face very well, social distancing, and frequent hand washing. So the vaccines that we're going to discuss today are yet another tool in the toolbox for prevention. But since we have only about 10% of the US starting with vaccines at this point, we must continue with those other preventive measures as well. We're going to get into that in detail. But first, I would like to ask Dr. Kocaoğlanyan to start us off and tell us a little bit about the 3 vaccines that we have approved currently for use in the United States. How are these different from one another? And is there any vaccine that's deemed better than the other vaccine?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kim, for the introduction. Vaccines are one of the major developments in science because they prevent deadly diseases such as COVID-19. So right now, currently, there is actually more than 50 vaccines in development, but we are lucky that 3 of them have reached a stage where they got emergency approval from the FDA and are already in use in millions and millions of Americans. So these three vaccines that are currently available are based on technology that has already been around for more than 10 years. So yes, they are new to human beings, but the technology and the platform that was used to prepare them has been an area of active research for more than 10 years. The ones that are currently being used in the United States are the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, which are very similar to each other in the technology that is being used, in the sense that they provide a message, what we call a messenger RNA, which is the building block that is provided to us so that we can see this building block, use our machinery to build up our immune system, such that when the actual virus hits us or attacks us, our immune system is ready and will not make us ill. The third one, the more recent one that was approved, is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which also relies on a message. The message, instead of being put in nanoparticles, in this case, it's put in a vector that goes in, again, just to deliver the message, and we use this message to build up our immune system. So we are very lucky that these vaccines, when they were designed to prevent symptomatic COVID-19. What does that mean? Symptomatic means someone who develops illness from COVID-19. It could be moderate illness, where somebody can have a little bit of fever and extreme fatigue and cough, or it can be severe illness leading to hospitalization, and in many cases, as we know, death. So the beauty about these vaccines is that all of them prevented severe COVID-19 equally well and equally highly, which means that if you get this vaccine, the chances that you're going to be hospitalized or die from COVID-19 are really less than 5%. And that in itself is a really huge achievement. They differ a little bit, just a tiny bit, in how much they might prevent more moderate or mild COVID-19. So one might be a tiny bit better in preventing mild disease. But at the end of the day, if we just get mild COVID and sneeze and cough a little bit, but stay home and we're fine in a few days, that's great. Really, what we want to obviously avoid is death and hospitalization and long-term consequences from COVID-19. And in that sense, all three vaccines protect equally well, and we are awaiting one or two others to hopefully join these three because those trials are almost also at the end, and the data look very reassuring.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, anything that we can do to protect ourselves from the risk of going to the hospital and perhaps having a severe outcome is a very hopeful outcome for these vaccines, and a hopeful message for the audience and for our friends and family as well. But I would like to ask now Dr. Bilizikian a question. In your career, you have served on multiple data management boards. You've looked at data, looking at the safety of drugs, for example, in clinical trials. You have a long history in your career doing that. Many people are asking us the question, how did they do this so quickly? And is it safe? Did they cut any corners when they were developing these vaccines? Because they came out, relatively speaking, so quickly. Could you address that concern for us today?
Kim, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to address these very important questions. The question of the speed of development of these vaccines is a reasonable one, because a year ago we had nothing except the conservative but nevertheless effective approaches. But clearly a vaccine was needed. Speed is a function of need and a function of resources. This coronavirus infection is a one-in-a-century event, and not to be overly dramatic, but our civilization was really threatened, and there needed to be resources brought to bear quickly, and those resources were brought to bear quickly. Celine mentioned the technological advances, and it is truly remarkable that unwittingly those technological advances were ready and were implemented. And Celine has described some of those technological advances. One other point that's worth making is that literally 1 month after the first case of coronavirus was identified in Wuhan, China, 1 month later, the protein sequence of the virus was known and published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And that opened the doors for the drug companies to develop vaccines. Now, I've been asked specifically to address the issue of safety and speed. I have been involved in data and safety monitoring boards continuously for the past 15 years. These boards are external, independent reviewing bodies that oversee the development of drugs, not just vaccines. And let me just briefly indicate that the process includes first designing the clinical trial. And clinical trials like this are always done with the approval of the FDA. So the FDA knows exactly what is being proposed. Secondly, there were 30 to 40,000 individuals involved in each of these clinical trials. When you think about my field, osteoporosis, the largest trial that I've been involved in was only 7,000. So many individuals. And the Moderna trial, for example, included 99 different centers in the United States. I mentioned the external data and safety monitoring boards. They were set up for each of these drug companies. And these data and safety monitoring boards have access to the data, both in terms of effectiveness and safety as the trial is developing. And at their decision, they can look at the data as blinded or as not blinded. And if at any point during the trial, there were safety signals that became apparent, they had the power to stop the study. Let me also say that these data and safety monitoring boards, as well as the FDA, have access to the entire portfolio of data that have been acquired by the drug companies. And in this case, the FDA, by the way, I'm not on any of the data and safety monitoring boards for these vaccines, but these monitoring boards and the FDA do their own statistical analysis with regard to efficacy and safety. And then finally, there's an expert panel, not part of the FDA, but convened by the FDA to review the data. And they then make recommendations. So rather than be concerned about the speed of these trials, I would say that these are marvels of biotechnology. And we have to be very grateful that a year later, we have made great progress.
Well, thank you very much for that. I just want to remind the audience who's just logging in now that we are taking, I'm going to be asking a few questions of our esteemed panelists, and then we are going to open up for open Q&A. And we see already that we have some very good questions coming in that we're definitely going to address in this session today. So Dr. Bilizikian just finished a discussion about the safety and development of the vaccines and talked about their crucial role in this very historic time. I would like to segue to ask questions now of Karine Shnorokian, who is a leader in the executive of an organization that has a number of long-term care facilities and nursing homes and rehab centers that were hit so badly by this virus this year and suffered a lot, both the residents of those and the staff. Karine, thank you for being with us today. Can you speak a little bit about the situation in long-term care facilities and how you and your staff have had to address safety and protection for this community, and how vaccine is weaved into that process of keeping people safe?
Sure. Thank you, Kim, for your question. And certainly I want to say thank you to the ARF for organizing this panel, as well as just an honor to be part of these distinguished panelists from APO. So, for myself, if you would have told me a year ago today that I would be doing a panel like this, talking about the experience of COVID and even having a vaccine never in a million years would I have thought that this is where we would be 365 days when literally our society shut down. For myself, I have worked in the nursing home industry only for 2 years, but have worked in healthcare for 15, with my primary focus being on healthcare transitions. So getting that patient from point A to point B as they transition through this, what we call it, the care continuum. Nursing homes are safe havens, really for the frail and elderly population. Most individuals do reside there. In fact, over close to 1.4 million Americans reside in over 15,000 nursing homes in the United States. However, there are a number of individuals that go there short term. So you had a really complicated hospitalization and you need to go to a nursing home to get better, to get stronger, to get therapy services that are more intense than just being home. So you tend to go to a rehab facility, which is in the same context. It's a nursing home that gives you that aggressive therapy you need to get better to go home. So, you know, there's many variabilities when you talk about the nursing home industry and the type of individuals that live there and the level of need of that skilled need of that day-to-day care that they are given. Specific to COVID, you know, a year ago, as we transformed and needed to quickly understand and really stop the spread in our centers, it was dramatic and it was very traumatic for many of us as we didn't quite understand what was happening. You know, we went from, you know, one case to hundreds of thousands of cases within a month throughout the nation, but certainly it did spread in a lot of communal livings, and from nursing homes to group homes to homeless shelters, you know, you name it, where you have a large abundance of individuals coming together. Of course, you are going to see an infection like COVID become rampant in these sort of settings. And we relied a lot on the CDC, which kind of gave us that guidance, as well as Medicare and Medicaid services, to really help us guide what we need to do. So you're talking from, you know, individuals that, you know, live in their room. This is their livelihood, right? They go and eat in the dining hall in a communal setting together. You know, they crave that need to be visited by their family members, to now being completely shut down and really confided to their rooms. That was really hard. And it was necessary. It was necessary to stop the need of spread and infection as we were learning how it was even spread, who was spreading it, you know, was it already in our facilities and everything of that sort. So from testing and the ability to get testing to our centers, you know, we're not a hospital setting, so you need to send these out to laboratories, to just protective equipment, right? Many of us in the nursing home settings don't need to gown regularly. We don't have patients with these massive infections that require gowning. So just all of these variabilities became really challenging as we were diving into this. And I have to say, I volunteered myself immediately to be part of these groups that really undertook the need of what would happen to make our residents safe, to make the patients safe, to make our staff safe. I attribute a lot of that to my Armenian growing up and being in multiple organizations, to just really get a handle on it. And I was really ready for that battle, because it was a battle. So here we are, you know, a year later, and yes, it has gotten bad press. The nursing home industry, they have said, you know, a lot of people unfortunately did die. And the reality is you are dealing with a much more frail population, and just the realities of a communal congregational setting where the spread was inevitable in happening. So, you know, in terms of jumping to what we're doing now, I just want to stress that nursing homes are very highly regulated. In fact, it is said that second to nuclear power plants, nursing homes are that high on the level of regulation just due to patient safety and quality. So, you know, you're talking specific to COVID now. We went from having testing last March and April, it took 5 to 7 days to get a test back, to now we have these immediate rapid tests that can detect COVID within 15 minutes. And you can actually see within 2 minutes if that line is going to be altered to show a positive case. So there are so much more that has evolved to keep our patients and our staff safe. So anybody that walks into the building, they call that the threshold. As soon as you walk into that building, there is swabbing that will occur, whether it's a patient or a staff member or a physician or an essential caregiver. Testing is one of the essential things that we should be doing and continuing to do. Even if you feel you don't have any symptoms, even if you've said you've had COVID, it's still an ongoing process because you need to stop that infection from entering that threshold and going through the doors. In addition to that, there's that protective equipment. So all of our staff are required to mask and actually wear face shields when coming into direct contact with patients. Not only that, but any patient coming new into our centers actually go into a separate wing, even though they might not have tested positive for COVID. We just don't know if COVID could happen. So it's that 10 to 14 day window where you did see, you felt great, day 10, day 11, all of a sudden you started having symptoms. So we actually, in our centers, we quarantine patients for 14 days alone in their room in a separate wing that actually has a negative pressure filtration. So it's circulating clean air throughout the center to just ensure that, God forbid, they were exposed in the hospital or something had happened, that that risk of infection is kept to a minimum because they're kept in a separate wing within our centers. Not only that, but in January, once it became evident that vaccines were going to happen, the reality became such as nursing homes obviously were prioritized. And with that, I'm proud to say that CVS and Walgreens partnered with almost every single nursing home and even assisted living facility in America to ensure vaccination clinics were happening. So just given the realities of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, especially Pfizer being, with the sub-zero temperatures and freezing and the multiple dose schedule, it became apparent that it just was not going to be feasible for nursing homes to manage that, right? So fortunately, Walgreens and CVS did partner, and to date of completed vaccines, they've almost given close to 1.8 million doses in the long-term care setting. That's about 80% when you come statistically for residents, for patients that have requested to be vaccinated. We're still a little bit low on the healthcare side. We're about 50% for staff. But again, that's sometimes we stagger it because, if side effects, things like that, as well as sometimes, that initial rollout people are concerned, which I'm sure Tolene can speak to as well. But the last thing, the final thing I want to stress is the biggest question I think people has is it safe for my loved one to go? Or I already have somebody living in a nursing home, when can I visit them? So these are two really important questions. One, I do believe it's safe. My father-in-law was actually in one of my centers over the summer for an unrelated COVID issue. And just knowing the amount of testing and the quick ability for patients to be moved and managed if, God forbid, they do have COVID or are exposed to COVID, we are so much further ahead than where we were last March and April. I wish we had those tools back in March and April of last year. But it is safe to send your loved one to a facility. There's always a risk, but there's also a risk going to the grocery store or meeting for dinner. I was just exposed a few weeks ago and actually had my work had required me to quarantine for 14 days, even though I've been vaccinated and everything, but that's just kind of the stringent policies that our work does. Coming to visit your loved one, right? So unfortunately, for many, many months, visiting was restricted because of the realities of we didn't have a vaccine, right? The only things, as mentioned, were conservative measures to prevent the spread. And despite, the realities of that and how difficult that was, it was an extreme measure. And that needed to happen as the vaccine rollout has happened. But the CDC just released guidance. It's so hard to plan for these things, but even just this past Wednesday, the CDC and CMS released guidance as to reopening their indoor visitation for nursing homes, like almost immediately. And those guidelines still need to be reviewed by every state in terms of their own Department of Health, as well as what they would recommend. And every nursing home also has their own guidelines as well. But I can tell you this, if your state's positivity rate specific to your county, and in New Jersey, where I'm from, it's in the 8s right now. If it's less than 10, that means you have a lower threshold of COVID happening within your county. And for the guidelines for the nursing home visitation, that means that the visitation can happen. Some other things that they look at is they don't want any COVID in the building for the last 28 days. So you're looking at 2 full cycles of any risk or spread of infection. And really that's not a bad, it's a very conservative measure, which is necessary. Because as we mentioned, you can get COVID on day 14 when you thought you were in the clear and then inhabit. One thing I do recommend, though it's not mandatory, is if you do come to visit a loved one and that is acceptable to your facility, offer to get tested. Everybody can have a rapid test done at the door now. And I think that's just really important. It's just good for you to know, and you don't want to be bringing something into the facility. You'll be required to wear a mask, and I think that that's very acceptable in terms of being in a facility and being at that risk, as well as you probably be requested to stay 6 feet away from your loved one, right? I know we want to hug and we want to kiss, and we're very close to getting there, but let's just be very mindful. Let's just try and ease this burden of third wave even more by being mindful of that, as well as be honest. If you maybe were exposed or you became exposed, or possibly were in an environment where you could have been exposed to COVID, be honest with that. Make sure you do your temperature checking and you answer those questions to the best of your knowledge, because we don't want the only person bringing it at that point would be a visitor, a family member, or a staff member if they were exposed, which is why we all undergo testing weekly as well. So those are, a few things I just wanted to explore. Right now with the vaccine clinics, it is a bit challenging to continue vaccinating new patients that are coming in, only because it was a series of clinics set up from the state. However, with at least with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which might be more readily available and that it's only 1 dose, we're hoping that at least by April, that will start coming into the centers so that we can continue to vaccinate staff and new patients that are arriving as it becomes available and more individuals are wanting to take on that vaccine.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. And we know that in this setting, it's been very traumatic, as you've mentioned and described, and thankful that vaccines are now the added tool to protecting this very vulnerable and at higher risk population. We're going to come back to you with questions on that.
I just want to say, Kim, a lot of our residents said we've been waiting for this. I think they lived through polio, right? They lived through a lot of firsts in terms of the experience. And there were so many residents that were celebrating that there was a vaccine now, and that this can reopen a normal, a new normal in the sense of what we've lived through in the last 365 days.
Yes, I can only imagine the emotions for them and for their families as well. So I'd like to now move to ask questions of Dr. Najarian. Dr. Najarian, we heard a description about the vaccines that are available in the public and what the differences are and how they work. We heard about how they were developed and how they were developed in a way that did not cut corners and that met the rigorous standards of clinical trials. And then we just heard from the nursing home and rehab setting that vaccinations are happening, and that a statistic was given that 80% of this at-risk population in the United States has already been vaccinated or is in the process of being vaccinated. So the question that I have for you at this juncture is there a way that there is ongoing monitoring of the safety of these vaccines once somebody is vaccinated? is there a way that we are watching what's going to happen to someone who's already received the vaccine?
Kim, that's a wonderful question. And I also want to begin by thanking all of you, my colleagues at the Armenian American Health Professionals Organization, for all you've done throughout this pandemic. I'd also like to thank the ARF for its continued interest in educating the public with the facts regarding the vaccine. Knowledge is power. And we all are going to hear a lot of different information from our friends who mean well, but don't necessarily know the science. So it really is amazing being with you all and hearing how you're communicating the science so we all can understand it. It's understandable to believe these vaccines, plural, is not safe. A year ago, we were being told that there was a 6% chance of developing a vaccine within 10 years, that we still don't have a vaccine for HIV. And yet today, we have 3 successful vaccines that have passed FDA muster and dozens more in the wings waiting to be approved. Truly a medical miracle. So what happens in this vaccination process? Well, I think Dr. Bilezikian really laid out the rigorous process that we even get to the point where we can talk about vaccine safety after it's approved. But just to embellish his point, out of every 10,000 compounds that are imagined, only 1 compound makes it through the rigorous FDA process. So that's quite an important number. In terms of what happens afterwards, there are a few different things. One is the studies that enabled these vaccines to be approved are still ongoing. Between the Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson trials, there are 177,500 patients enrolled in these 3 studies. And these studies are ongoing. They definitely would have picked up any of the acute problems that can occur with vaccines. But the FDA and all of us in science are aware that even though these are huge studies by comparison, typical studies, a few thousand patients, we're talking about 177,000 patients. These are huge studies. There is still that possibility of that 1 in a million complication. And the FDA is acutely aware of that. So it's empowered each and every one of us, whether we're healthcare providers or citizens, to respond and communicate our complications to the CDC directly. Now, how do we do that? One is there's a cell phone app for a smartphone called vSafe. And before you get the vaccine, you can register with vSafe. When you get the vaccine, this program will text you and ask you if you have any problems. If you have any complications or any side effects at all, you can type your side effects in. This will be then collected at the CDC, which looks at this and the data from thousands and thousands of others, looking for trends. If they see anything alarming in this vSafe program, they may even contact you. So that triggers a second level of scrutiny. In addition to that, as healthcare providers, whether you're a nurse, you're a pharmacist, you're a dentist, you're a physician, we're obligated to report to the FDC any problems that should occur, any side effects that occur in our patients. And again, what the CDC does is it collects all of this data, monitoring it actively, looking for trends. And if anything that is alarming, it will certainly raise flags and bring it to another level, which we'll discuss in a moment. Simultaneous to that, the CDC has set up a medical SWAT team, so to speak. These are 9 centers throughout the United States. The closest ones on the East Coast are Johns Hopkins, Columbia, and Boston University. And at these universities lie healthcare professionals who are expert in vaccine safety and complications. So if any healthcare provider should have an issue, this is a hotline available to healthcare providers, 724, and this SWAT team will be called upon to help assist that patient who's in need. Now, let's just say there is something the CDC is noticing through texts from anyone in the public that wants to respond or from healthcare providers. It has a network with 8 to 9 major health insurers in the United States, healthcare systems, Harvard Pilgrim being the one closest to us, in California, Kaiser Permanente. And the CDC can then ask the question, hey, we've seen this side effect occur from text messages from patients and physicians. Is there a correlation with the vaccine? So it goes to this patient base of about 24 million, and then it culls through the medical data. We do have electronic healthcare records in this country, and every time you see a physician, your visit is coded. So is any major medical illness that you have. So the CDC has the ability to cull through millions and millions of patient data looking for an answer to the question, hey, we've seen this side effect. Is this side effect occurring more in patients with the vaccine or not as much? So that's another level of scrutiny. In addition, all long-term care facilities like the ones Karina works at, all ambulatory surgical centers, renal dialysis centers, hospitals, are also obligated to report any complications they may see, any side effects to the CDC. What happens next is really amazing. And actually, this is a really quite impressive web of overlaying surveillance systems. There's something called PRISM, the Post-Licensure Rapid Safety Monitoring. This consists of a relationship the CDC has with insurers, the major insurers in the United States. And through this, they have the patient data of 190 million Americans. They then overlay that data with the vaccine information. Any of us that have gotten the vaccine are registered through our state and local governments with the CDC. They can overlap those two systems, the data set from all of us that visit physicians, 190 million, versus who's gotten the vaccine. And again, look for trends, looking for that needle in a haystack. Where is that 1 in a million complication? So all of these layers that I just discussed are replicated throughout the veterans hospital system, throughout the military, as well as Indian health. So many, many levels of scrutiny are ongoing as we speak. In addition to what's happening here in the United States, these vaccines are also being studied by the United Kingdom and the European monitoring agencies. So I think this should instill a lot of confidence in all of us. Just to conclude, we're all concerned about that 1 in a million complication. Having said that, every day today, this last week, over 1,400 Americans will die of COVID-19. And yesterday, 54,000 of us developed COVID-19. When you look at the risk of serious illness and death from COVID-19 versus our concern about that 1 in a million complication, we can see that the benefits of the vaccine very much outweigh any potential side effects. Thank you, Kim.
Yes, thank you very much for that sobering message. We are getting a lot of great questions in the Facebook Live platform, and we are definitely going to get to those questions. I'm going to start with Dr. Tsolin Kojarolanyan again. Tsolin, a lot of questions coming in through the chat about the side effects that people experience when they get vaccines. But so if you could address that, and in addition to that question, if you could address a little bit about once you are vaccinated, what is it that you can do? Can vaccinated people get together as a group, and what should they do in public? So if you could talk a little about the side effects, and why is it, this is a question that's coming up a few times in this chat, why is it that some people have a very severe reaction, or they experience short-term but more symptoms, and some people don't experience anything? Does that mean that the vaccine works for some and doesn't work for others?
Great. So imagine about the vaccine, guys, being inducing or revving up our immune system, right? So I kind of make it an analogy to a car. You cannot start a car and not expect a sound, right? We are revving up the engine of the car, in this case, the engine of the car being our immune system. So we have to expect that it's going to make some sound. Now, some cars make more sound than others. Some engines are woo-woo and others are milder, but that doesn't mean that one works better than the other. So that's the simplest way of me describing that to you. So every vaccine, because it's revving up our immune system, and when our immune system revs up, it releases some chemicals. And the release of some of those chemicals, which is the normal response to a vaccine, will lead in certain percentage of people to fever, some chills, some local soreness at the site of the injection, and some fatigue. And now some, as I said, people have more of these side effects than others, just because, as I said, some cars make more of a noise than others. But that doesn't mean that those who are not having side effects are not having the full protection that the vaccine affords. It's a very individual response, just like with COVID-19, right? Some of us are handling it completely without symptoms, and some of us, unfortunately, are ending up in a hospital or dying from it. So I would put it that way when it comes to side effects. Now, in a extremely small percentage of patients with both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, as well as the J&J vaccine. And when I say extremely rare, it's almost 1 in 5 million of doses. It's associated with what we call a severe allergic reaction or anaphylaxis. And it is postulated that one of the components that is being used to make these vaccines, to basically, like a preservative almost of these vaccines, is inducing this allergic response. And this allergic response is characterized because it's so severe, the reaction occurs immediately. So it's not something that you're going to see later at night or the next day. It's going to happen within the first 30 minutes of receiving the vaccine, and it could manifest as flushing feeling, redness, maybe the lips feel a little bit swollen, maybe somebody gets short of breath. And because of this reason, all of these vaccines right now are being administered in a setting where there is a nurse or an EMT or someone who can immediately counter this allergic reaction should it happen. Again, remember, it's only 1 in 5 million chances that it is going to happen. So what we are saying is that even if you already have allergies, severe allergies to peanuts or eggs or some food dyes, that doesn't mean that you cannot get the vaccine. You should still get the vaccine, but just be monitored a little bit longer. And if the 30 minutes pass and you didn't develop this reaction, then you're scot-free. Now, if you happen to develop the reaction to the first dose of the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines, then that's the only instance where we would tell you not to receive the second dose of the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, respectively. The J&J happens to be a single dose. So if you develop a severe allergic reaction, obviously you're not going to have to worry about dose number 2. But basically, there is really no contraindication not to receive these vaccines, because that's the worst thing that could happen, and it is easily reversible. So somebody can give you the appropriate medication, and that severe allergic reaction is immediately reversible. Nobody has died from that severe allergic reaction to this day. And all the other side effects we talked about, if you happen to have them, it's estimated that about 10 to 15% of people are going to have the high noise of the car engine, which means they're going to develop the side effects with the chills, with the fatigue, with the fever, just feeling a little bit achy. It's not going to last more than 12 to 24 hours, and also easily treated with ibuprofen or Tylenol. There is one reaction that is being described a little bit more with Moderna than with Pfizer, but again, extremely rare. And it's a little bit of a delayed reaction. It's happening 7 days after receiving the vaccine. And basically in the area of the injection, there is like a big wheel, a red spot with some itching, a little bit of discomfort that might last a few days. Again, easily treatable with Benadryl or such medications. And then as far as the second part of the question, Kim, when we inject the vaccine, it takes our body, this machinery that's going to be kicked in and revved up, it takes 14 days for it fully ready to counter a virus attack. So in the first 2 weeks after receiving the vaccine, we have to assume that we are not protected yet. Therefore, we cannot go and see our vaccinated friends. We cannot go visit anybody. We have to continue strictly distancing and masking as if we didn't get the vaccine. Now, the CDC very recently said that because this vaccine is highly protective, as we said earlier, against severe disease and moderately severe disease, if you've had your 2 doses of Pfizer and Moderna and you waited 2 weeks after the second dose, remember it takes 2 weeks for everything to kick in. Then if you can gather in very small groups where the other members of the group have also gotten their full 2 doses of vaccine, then it's okay to be together in that setting. Always remembering that ventilation is very important, and luckily we are approaching warmer days, so always keep a window open, a door open, ventilation coming in and out, because as we all know, nothing in life works 100%. The best of the vaccines are only 95, 96, 97% protective, so we still have to count, do our part in that 3%. I think I answered both, right, Kim? Did I miss any?
Yes, there are more questions coming for you, but
Okay.
just hang on there. I'd like to switch gears just for a little bit. And you spoke about that there are very few contraindications. That means that very, very few people are told that they shouldn't get the vaccine. Most people should be getting the vaccine. And I'd like to ask my next question to Dr. Bilizikian.
So I could just mention, who are those people who should not get the vaccine? Are those people who have known severe allergic reaction to what we call PEG, PEG, or polysorbate. And people would know this because they would have already reacted to previous injectable PEG or polysorbate. So it would be part of their medical history. So only those people should not be receiving the vaccine. And then, of course, we can go into detail about some cancer patients, etc. But yes, that's the only contraindication not to receive the vaccines.
So I might be circling back to you after this, because
Yes.
there is a question in the chat from somebody who asks about cancer and vaccines. But let me start with Dr. Bilizikian, who in his practice treats patients with a number of long-term chronic diseases. And I think that you've had experience recently, Dr. Bilizikian, of having patients that are asking you for your advice, that with their given condition, should they be taking the vaccine? Could you take us through some of how what your patients' main concerns are and how you advise them about this decision?
Well, Kim, thank you. This question has at least 10 answers, but obviously we don't have that much time. But these are very important questions my patients ask. One I wanted to underscore, and just was alerted to me last night from a patient of mine, a misconception about the vaccine itself. That is, these are not live viruses. These are not attenuated virus. And as Celine beautifully described, these are messengers that make, or the body makes, an altered protein of the virus. It isn't even the real protein, but they're highly reactive. That is, the body reacts to them. So one of the misconceptions of my patients is, I don't want to get a live virus. The answer is, you're not getting a live virus. Another question is, am I eligible? Well, thankfully, this country is doing it right. And within a few months, everyone is going to be able to get vaccination. But right now we talk about comorbid conditions, and you name it, it's a comorbid condition. So as Celine said, the only situation would be that's very unusual allergic reaction. I have a patient who is allergic to everything, and he nevertheless got the vaccine. He was properly prepared beforehand, but even that didn't stop him. Where can I get the vaccine? Well, I won't even have to answer that question now because it's becoming easier and easier. Celine addressed the question of, when I am vaccinated, do I still have to take precautions? Yes. How long will the vaccination last? Celine, you're going to address this one. I don't think we know. When I'm vaccinated, can I still be contagious? Well, we're not sure about that. Maybe with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there's some evidence, but we theoretically could be contagious, that is, spread the virus. We've talked about reactions. We've talked about the differences between the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines and the J&J, so I won't touch about that. My patients ask me about these resistant strains, and I just want to say in that regard, it is truly amazing. One of the investigators at Columbia, a world-famous virologist, within 2 months of knowing the sequence of this virus, had made 10 pseudoviruses, anticipating that there would be resistant strains. And sure enough, they actually had sequenced the UK virus and the South African variant, as well as the Brazilian variant. They were already on it. And as you know, many of these companies are developing multivalent vaccines that will hopefully be able to address these resistant strains. I mentioned the rapidity of development, and I take that. And the last question, should I take the vaccine? And I will spend as much time as I can to explain to them that the answer is yes.
And any vaccine you can get, right, Dr. Bilezikian? There is no one better than the other. Whichever is available to you today, offered, take it.
That's exactly
our
right.
message.
That's exactly right. You go and you get what you're going to get, and don't ask questions, because they all are they're all very, very effective.
Thank you so much. I think it was a really, the way that you listed the common questions, they actually mirror a lot of the questions we're getting here in the chat. So thank you for laying out your answer that way. It was very, very helpful. Just to reiterate, I don't know if people are logging in later and didn't see our earlier, you will be able to view the entire video at the end of the broadcast. I do want to just repeat, somebody asked the question, is it safe to take Advil or Tylenol after you have the vaccine when you are starting to feel symptomatic? And I'm just
absolutely safe. Yes.
So Celine, I don't recommend that my patients take it before.
Correct. She said after.
Yeah, but afterwards, if they're symptomatic, I took it when I had a reaction. I took the Tylenol, and it really was very, very effective.
Not before, after.
Great. So I have a question for Karinesh Norokian. As you've seen, your older population, many of them very sick, many of them very much older. How's the vaccine going in that population? And the second question I have for you is different than that. Why don't you answer that question, then I'll ask you the second one.
So we weren't sure what to expect, right? So I assisted in one of our our largest center in New Jersey, where we vaccinated close to 155 residents with about 170 capacity. And some residents just weren't eligible for other reasons, or maybe some family members still refused. And surprisingly, the most we saw on the initial dose was fever activity. So, just general, maybe 99, 100 low-grade fevers. And this included residents that maybe had COVID even last year, or, after the 90-day mark and still got the vaccine, or residents that had never had COVID before. Nobody had an anaphylactic reaction. Actually, in any of our centers, to my knowledge, nobody had a severe reaction, which is what we were referencing before, where you might, have that shortness of breath or that acute event, and we had nurses oversee and make sure everybody was monitored. But, generally achiness, I would say some of them had felt, but relatively, I was really surprised. I did notice much more of our staff being uncomfortable. But again, maybe we just complain a bit more. I don't know.
And females are having more side effects than men. That might tell you something.
And most of our residents are females right now, so survival of the fittest. Generally nobody went out acutely to the hospital with a reaction, none of that sort. We didn't see any of that. We surprisingly, we did quite well with how the elderly population responded to the vaccine.
Thank you. Thank you. And actually, I wanted to ask another question that's different from the population, the senior population. In general, if someone has already had COVID-19, should they get vaccinated?
Oh, absolutely. And I think I actually was privileged to do this little recording for APA about a couple weeks ago on this. Having COVID, and I don't know who else on the panel maybe had COVID. I was diagnosed with COVID last April. The telltale sign, I lost my sense of smell, and knew I had it, but was still kind of going to work because of those needs, and distanced myself. But I had gotten tested, and it took 5 days to get the results, because that's just what it was back then. But I had it. My husband had it. Thankfully, the kids were okay. But the biggest fear for me were my in-laws going to get it, because at the time they were taking care of our kids because I had to go into work every day. I don't work from home in that reality. And thankfully they never got COVID. So knowing that experience, and though I had a very mild case, but Vahik was pretty sick, 100%, you know, if you have the vaccine available to you, you get the vaccine. I don't want to be that case that is that random case that gets it again or gets the you know, and we don't know. We don't know if your T cells will have the memory to prevent you from ever getting COVID again. You know, we haven't seen cases in our centers where somebody got COVID twice, but we just don't know enough about this disease, right? It's only a year and some months old. It's a baby in its stages of diseases. So the reality is get the vaccine. You know, they do recommend some waiting if you've recently had it, but I say if it's available to you now and you got the list and you got an appointment date, go in and get the vaccine, regardless if you've had COVID or not. Can't stress that enough.
Great. Thank you very, very much. I'd like to pivot our topic to ask questions about people who are going into healthcare settings for routine checkups. A lot of people, and I'd like to ask Dr. Najarian this question, a lot of people have put off their routine screenings for regular care, going to the dentist, going to the eye doctor, and now we are seeing more and more vaccinations. Dr. Najarian, what advice do you have for our audience as they're making those decisions to go back into healthcare settings, either if they're vaccinated or not vaccinated? And can you speak from your own personal experience about, even though you're vaccinated, can you describe to the audience how you treat the patients that are coming in to be sure that you're protecting them and protecting yourself?
Sure. That's a wonderful question. It's a very important question. I think we're going to unfortunately see a bumper crop of medical complications from people who were too scared to go for their routine mammograms, their pap smears, their colonoscopies, their heart checks, their eye checks. I personally, as a treating physician, have seen people, unfortunately, with chronic diseases have complications where they did not seek timely care. It's very, very sad. I've always felt, and my colleagues as well, that it's very incumbent upon all of us as healthcare providers to try to create the safest environment possible for our staff, as well as for our patients coming in. And I often comment to my family, who is very concerned about my health during this pandemic, that I feel safer in the office than I do anywhere else. For consumers, I think it's the expression, know before you go. Do your research. Try not to go to crowded settings at peak times. Go to the supermarkets off hours. Go to Costco at off hours. If you have serious comorbidities, illnesses like cancer and so forth, try to let other people go into those crowded settings. In physician offices, I think COVID is tragic in many ways, and our hearts go out to all the families that have been impacted by it. But it's helped improve the standard of care. You don't have waiting rooms because there's no one in the room waiting. People go right into exam rooms. We have special ventilation systems now that help filter the particulate respiratory droplets to decrease the chance of spreading the infection. We try to decrease the time that technicians and healthcare providers spend with patients, not in a way to change the care that they're getting, but try to be more efficient in delivering that needed care. And the mechanisms work. I personally was shocked. Since this pandemic began, I have seen about 3,000 patients. In the beginning, unfortunately, without a mask. I have subsequently found out specific circumstances where I was exposed to people that at the time were asymptomatic carriers of COVID-19. And what pleasantly surprised me when I got my antibodies tested right before the vaccine is I was antibody negative, meaning most likely I had not developed COVID-19, which means all the measures we've taken, the measures I mentioned, but in addition, the social distancing, keeping our distances, not hugging people, not shaking hands, the wearing of a mask, wearing goggles to protect my eyes from viral particles going in, washing my hands frequently, and most importantly, not doing what most of us do about 16 times per hour, touching our face, which is a very natural thing to do. These things sound so simple, yet they work. They have huge implications in helping us prevent the spread. So as we move forward, we're still continuing these same precautions in our office. We know now about 10% of the population has been vaccinated. It's reassuring when I talk with patients this week that more people have access to the vaccine than they did only a short 2 weeks ago. I think we still have to maintain those precautions for the foreseeable future. Moving forward, I think we'll all be better off for it. It's kind of silly when you have a cold, you're feeling lousy, what do? You go to a physician's office where there are healthy people and you possibly can infect others. I think what this pandemic has really taught us is how to create a safer patient and staff environment for everybody. So I'm optimistic that the future will be very bright, but we still have to maintain all of those precautions. In regards to patient visits, in addition to what I do as an eye physician, I'm also very aware of our role as a healthcare provider and asking people about their feelings about vaccines. And it's not uncommon to hear a lot about vaccine hesitancy. I usually conclude with vaccine hesitant persons that this is probably the most selfless thing that you can do to help humanity. It is true that the person getting the vaccine benefits directly. But if all of us get this vaccine, we will deny the virus the chance to live. We will deny the virus a chance to mutate. We will increase the chances for all of us to do well throughout this pandemic. So again, I encourage everybody to get the vaccine. It's a small step for man, but one giant leap for mankind, as Neil Armstrong said. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope that that encourages our audience and answers some of their questions. I think that you have, in this forum in the past and frequently in APO meetings you've discussed, that is the right of the patient as well to ask for the office that they're going to ask them in advance what safety procedures they're following as well. So thank you for encouraging us to continue to do that. And thank you for continuing to provide a safe space for your own patients and community as well. Thank you. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to try to group them a little bit together. The next question I'm going to ask Dr. Kocaoğlanyan is this question about the double mask. Does it really help? And do we need to do it all the time?
I think the double masking issue came up because a lot of us have, I'm sure, seen people who think they are masked, but the mask is below their lower lip or below their nose. I always say, remember guys, when we are looking for the virus, where are we swabbing you? Up in the nose, right? So that's exactly where the virus is. So if we are preventing the virus to pass from one person to the other, we got to make sure we cover the area where we are finding the virus. So from the beginning, we wanted to always recommend that the mask, because we didn't have enough surgical grade masks to cover the whole population, we said one can get a cloth mask, but as long as the cloth mask is layered and thick, still breathable, of course, but layered and thick. And so I think the double masking comes from the fact that many people, were wearing masks more as a fashion statement than an actual protective layer with the see-through masks, beautiful masks, but not doing the job that they're supposed to do. So I think that if you do have a surgical mask or a thick mask that's layered and covering you appropriately and snugly, as you said, Kim, then you don't need to do double mask. And the best way, I think, to also do it is if you have a cloth mask, you can, with a pouch where you can put a surgical mask in so that the surgical mask can last you longer and you can just wash the cloth mask. And this is another way of double masking. But again, you can have 6 masks on as long as your nose is uncovered, you're still not masked. So the idea is to make sure that it fits where it's supposed to fit.
And Kim, if I could ask also, there are some people that wear a mask that have a little snorkel. So when you exhale, your breath comes out.
Those are not good.
That is probably one of the worst things you can do. Correct. Because you're focusing your breath and all the respiratory droplets as a stream of air that will go much further and potentially contaminate people. So that is really a no-no. It looks nice, it sounds neat, but it's really not functional for the purposes that you're getting it.
Correct.
Great. Soline, I'm going to stay with you for a minute and ask you, we have a specific clinical question from somebody who asked the question, for people in their 70s who last year, for example, had treatment for B cell type of lymphoma, a type of cancer, is it safe for them to be vaccinated?
So it doesn't matter what the age is, as long as somebody has cancer. Typically, for patients who have cancer, the concern is that their immune system is weak and is not functioning properly, right? So as Dr. Bilezikian said and reminded us all, that these are not live viral vaccines, meaning in the vaccine, there is nothing live, there is nothing that can multiply on its own. These are the type of vaccines, live vaccines, that we usually don't give at all to cancer patients and immunocompromised patients. So this is just really, again, I like analogies because I feel like the image is always good. So take a whole human being, you're basically just injecting the hair, okay? The rest of it is not there. So there is no concern by just injecting a message or a protein into an immunocompromised person, such as a cancer person. Now, of course, the timing of the chemotherapy and the type of the chemotherapy that the person is receiving also matters, because there are some chemotherapeutic agents that basically completely annihilate temporarily the type of cells we need to rev up our immune system and to provide antibodies to protect us against the vaccine. So basically the vaccine cannot function without certain cells in our body. And if those certain cells in our body are completely removed because of chemotherapy, then you can discuss with your physician as to the timing of your vaccine and if your chemotherapy. So what we are saying is that if it's some sort of therapy that can be delayed a tiny bit, so that you can get your vaccine first, right, and have your cells ready to rev up and build your immune system, and then get your chemotherapeutic agent or whatever else is for your disease, then that would be the ideal way to do it. Obviously, if the chemotherapy cannot be delayed, then you have to discuss with your doctor that maybe you need to continue quarantining or staying away from crowds until you are eligible for vaccine. So it's a case-by-case basis, depending on where they are in remission or receiving chemotherapy and what type of chemotherapy are they receiving. But all the vaccines can be given because they are not live.
And importantly, we encourage you to have this conversation with your medical team and your doctor as you make these decisions. But the message here is clear that even if you have something that is immunocompromising, that you are eligible still for the vaccine. You just need to coordinate that with the other treatment that you're undergoing.
I want to also point out, just Kim, because I think it's important, because in our population, unfortunately, we do have this a lot. More and more studies, like Dr. Bilezikian was saying, almost any disease is a comorbidity for COVID-19, but obesity, being overweight, is really coming up in every single study and group of data. So I feel like I wanted to bring this up because honestly, we always talk about losing weight, and it's not easy to do that during a pandemic at all, but if it's one thing we can do to protect us from severe outcomes, it's to really have our diabetes very well controlled and our weight. And I'm sure Dr. Bilezikian can add on that.
I was going to ask him, yeah, you can add to that too, but I was going to ask you, there's a question in the chat that says, if I'm fully vaccinated, can I go visit my little grandnephew who's a year and a half and I haven't seen him yet? What are you telling your patients, Dr. Bilezikian, who are fully vaccinated, given the new CDC guidance that has come out?
Yeah, well, we all will have an opinion of that, but the new CDC guidelines, it depends on where that youngster is in the large enlarging bubble. But that little 1.5-year-old and the grandparent who's been fully vaccinated, again, taking the usual precautions, but I think that would be acceptable. That others may have comments about that. Selena, you just triggered an interesting thought. Not that my thought is interesting, but I heard, in fact, I did see it actually, believe it or not, on a website, the following. if you lose weight, you won't get the coronavirus, quote unquote. So that, I mean, the advice,
That's
of course,
extreme.
is to lose weight. Obviously, we want our obese patients to lose weight, whether or not there's COVID around. But the misunderstanding sometimes is, we're giving the wrong message. Lose weight and you're not going to get sick.
No. Yeah.
And so I just wanted to obviously make that,
100%.
yeah.
Yes, we have to be very careful about the words we are using. It doesn't prevent you from getting it, but hopefully it prevents you from getting the severe outcomes.
That's correct.
Of COVID-19.
So I'm going to ask our panelists just to give their final closing thoughts, and I'll go around. I'm going to go to you next, Karine. But before I do that, I just wanted to say there are a lot of questions in the chat that are not currently answerable. There are questions, for example, about how long the vaccine will be effective. We don't yet know. There are questions about whether we will need an annual booster. We also don't know that. What we know, however, is that the vaccines that are available today are safe and they're effective. And this group of panelists is recommending that you get that vaccine as a way of protecting yourself from severe outcome from COVID-19, from protection from hospitalization and protection from death. This you protect yourself and you protect those that are in your vicinity. As the science progresses, we will have more information that will be able to answer these questions, and we are happy to come back together as a group and give you the latest updates so that we know we can give you answers to these questions that are based on science, not just based at this point on our hypothetical understandings. So I'm going to just go around and ask for closing thoughts, and I encourage people in the chat to feel free to reach out to us either through the ARF Eastern Region office or through the Armenian American Professional Health Organization, APO, and we would be happy to answer your questions or to connect you. There are a lot of questions in the chat about how to get the appointment. And what Dr. Bilizikin and others have indicated, Dr. Najarian, is that every week we are getting more supplies. And as we get more supplies, we're able to vaccinate more people. As we're able to vaccinate more people, that demand and supply, relationship is changing. It is true that right now demand is much greater than supply, but that is evening out. And certainly by the beginning of summer, it is anticipated that anyone who desires to get the vaccine can start registering and be able to get a vaccine. So for those of you who have not yet been able to get a vaccine, there are a couple of questions about whether there are organizations that help people navigate this system. And there are. I would encourage you, since this is an Eastern Region Facebook Live and we're representing a lot of different states, I would encourage you to contact your local health department, and you can do that by telephone, and you can tell them that you're having difficulty navigating the system and could they help you to register for that system. With that thought, I'm going to ask Karine for closing remarks, and I will wind up at the end with Soling.
Thank you, Kim, and to all our panelists. Even though I'm a panelist, I learned something even just by amongst all of your knowledge. So thank you for that. Yes, there is this light, right, at the end of the tunnel. And I remember, Kim, months ago, and when we didn't have the vaccine and the only tools were the distancing and the safe measures as mentioned tonight. And, that vaccine is one step further. So, we can't undo some of the trauma that we've seen in the last year. And I'm going to take a lot of that trauma and what could I have done better with me for the rest of my life. And the fear is that, I could have given it to my kid. There could have been a really bad outcome in way things went. But, I want to stress that, we're not done with this. This is a pandemic, right? And, when we initially thought schools were going to be closed for 2 weeks, look at us here, a year later with the stresses of what we're dealing with, even in our personal lives. But we still have to be careful and mindful and to do what we need to do to be safe for everybody. So if you're not feeling well, stay home. We've already been pretty good at that for the last year, and make every conscious effort to be mindful of that. If, and I can speak specific to New Jersey, but, we've had outbreaks in churches and events, and to know that there are treatments, and I know, Tolene, we mentioned we were going to maybe talk about this, but there are even monoclonal antibody treatments. We've come a long way. It's not a death sentence anymore. You can get pretty sick with COVID, but there are these proactive treatments that you can do even in an outpatient setting if you have COVID. I want you to know that, and maybe your healthcare professional, provider might not know, but certainly to reach out to APO or, this forum. If, let's say, you did have a positive COVID diagnosis and you're not feeling well, you're not sick enough to go to the hospital, but can you get treated? Yes. There are treatments that you can do in your community that are even like life-saving and may prevent a hospitalization, just like the vaccine is helping to do. There are Facebook groups that you can join to how to get the COVID vaccine. So there's like a New Jersey group that's just pouring with people, even volunteers, that will help you get an appointment as well if you're willing to travel and distance and things like that. So we've come a long way, and there's a lot of people that want to help just by being good, human beings out there. So there is that out there. And in the nursing home world, you can always feel free to connect with me on any level of just, the realities of what's happening there. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Larry, closing thoughts on tonight's panel.
Yeah, my first thought is, wow, the panelists are all incredible. And I'm so proud that they're in an organization that represents Armenian healthcare providers in the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut area. My second is special thanks to the ARF for producing a program like this that can impact so many. I think Karina touched on a lot of very good points, and there's a point I'd like to reemphasize. Unfortunately, in theory, this program for vaccination was very good. You focus on the elderly and work your way down to the less vulnerable populations. But in that, getting that vaccine into the arm in the elderly is not as easy as it sounds, because it depended on modern technologies, smartphone usage, internet usage. The very skills needed to get the vaccine are the skills that this population, most at need, doesn't have. And there are older people who don't have the ability to do auto redial on the phone, to make 30 calls in an hour, to refresh their computer screen at 2 o'clock in the morning to get on that vaccine list. And it is true in New Jersey, there are several Facebook help groups where young volunteers have successfully obtained the vaccine for elderly patients. So my first concern and ask is for everyone to rack their brains, try to think of elderly people they know that might benefit from their volunteer efforts to help them get the vaccine. That's going to be very, very important to get the most vulnerable populations vaccinated. My second is, again, to remind everybody that getting the vaccine is a tremendously selfless act. It denies the virus an opportunity to grow and spread. It's the only way we're going to stop this pandemic. The third is to realize that we do live in a bubble. We are so blessed to live in the United States. Anyone that's been on a medical mission, anyone who's been into rural areas knows that running water, electricity, walking into a supermarket with thousands of ready-to-eat items is a tremendous blessing. We are tremendously blessed to even have a discussion that most Americans who want the vaccine will be vaccinated by summer. This is truly incredible. And with that knowledge, we'll see a lot of our behaviors changing, a lot of desire to travel. Unfortunately, we do live in a world that still has a raging pandemic. Most parts of the world don't have the same access that we have here. So we have to be mindful of that. We just can't say we're going to travel to X, Y, and Z outside of the United States and be safe. That's not true. You might be traveling into the middle of a raging pandemic. And having the vaccine, yes, it prevents serious disease, it prevents death, but it's not 100%. So we have to be very mindful of that. We also have to be mindful that if there's any way we can help these underprivileged areas get the vaccine, it should have all of our support. Because again, we are tremendously blessed to live in a country like the United States. So there is very much light at the end of the tunnel. Whoever thought a year ago we would be in a situation where we have 3 vaccines and multiple treatments? But yes, we have it. There's some more exciting things coming down the pike, and we will hear about them over the next 6 to 12 months. It is very exciting. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but we still, each of us, have to remain vigilant and respect that this is a very serious, potential life-threatening disease. So with that, I wish everybody good health, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you. I just would like to give opportunity for closing remarks from Dr. Vilizikian and then Dr. Kojaholanyan, and then we will wrap up the video.
Well, first, let me say it's been a great privilege for me to be on this panel. I always find new things that I didn't know, and I've learned a lot. I would not like to downplay the serious nature of the times we are in. We can't overemphasize the very important points that we have covered. But I would like to end with a few positive notes. I would like to say that this experience has taught us so much new about the development of new vaccine methodology. That, as Larry pointed out, we have learned how to make our medical environment safer. We have learned a lot about social behavior. And I think when this is over, hopefully it will be, I think our behavior with each other will never be the same. It'll be better. The public health implications, and Kim, you are the true master of this, are enormous. For example, how rapid data are being acquired centrally and being distributed. Larry, you had a down note about vaccine. I would have an up note. The vaccine deployment has been a tour de force in this country, 1 to 2 million per day. This is unbelievable. We have learned how to conduct a massive clinical trial in a year. This is unbelievable. And we are learning how to save ourselves. So these have been desperate times, but I think they have led to great opportunities. And in this regard, I think the future is bright.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Dr. Kojaholanyan, top that.
Can't. I'll try. First of all, it's been a pleasure working with all of you this past year in every single possible way. We have gone closer, and it's an honor for me. And it's been an honor to serve the Armenian community and answer as much of your questions as I have been able to. I want to say that I am very proud to be a doctor and scientist in this year, because despite everything bad we have seen on the political scene, the war scene in Armenia, you know, we have seen so much bad, people not believing in science or degrading science. But I think on the other side of the coin is how wonderful our scientific minds have been throughout centuries to get us where we are today, the miraculous work of vaccine development that we are lucky worked so quickly. I want to do a couple of points, because this comes to one-on-one people who have called me, and I have seen this happen a lot. It's when it comes to the treatment. I just want to put this in because you guys could be prescribed these medications. For example, you have heard of ivermectin, you have heard of doxycycline, and this has been, as I said, for me, personal experiences from the Armenian community, where they go to an urgent care with COVID-19 and they are being prescribed medications that are not only not going to touch the COVID-19, but could potentially be harmful to you. So if you see a prescription for ivermectin or doxycycline antibiotic from a telehealth visit because you have COVID-19, please do not fill them. And it's my responsibility. I take full responsibility for that. The point I'm making is that there is, you know, it's a little bit of a wild west still 1 year into this. A year ago, yes, we were trying hydroxychloroquine and what have you, because we didn't know how to approach this disease. But now we have so much information, like Dr. Vilizikian said, that we know what works and we know for sure what doesn't work. And if this day and age you are prescribed ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, aspirin or doxycycline, then your doctor or PA or nurse practitioner doesn't know what they're doing. Please contact a trusted physician, infectious disease specialist, academic hospital, and APO is always available to help you. Karine alluded to the monoclonal antibody, which is a treatment modality for outpatient before you even get to the hospital. So for those who are of a certain age or have certain comorbidities, they are eligible. Just a reminder, if you do receive monoclonal antibodies as treatment, you cannot get the vaccine for 90 days afterwards. So obviously, if you need it, you get it, but that's going to delay your vaccine, and that's totally fine. And last but not least, as a virologist, I spent my specialty 5 years in an adenovirus lab, and which is the vector being used for the J&J and the AstraZeneca vaccines. So viruses have a special place in my heart, but that doesn't mean that they are not bad news. And this virus is bad news because it is spreading so fast, yes, and it's not killing everyone when it spreads. It's killing haphazardly. So this for us is the biggest nightmare, where if it killed everybody, then it will die with the person it kills. But here it's not killing everybody, and it's spreading widespread. And every time it spreads uncontrollably, it can mutate. So Dr. Bilezikian called them the resistant variants. Some people are calling them mutants or scariants. This is what I heard this week. I liked it, scariants. So we don't know how they are going to behave. You might hear a lot of things from South Africa. The vaccine doesn't work. We don't know how they're going to behave. What we know is now. What we know is if we get vaccinated now and we build up our immune system now, we should be ready for any variant. But at the same time, if we do everything and travel uncontrollably, like Larry said, and don't believe that this virus is a problem, the virus can multiply even if in asymptomatic people. As long as it's multiplying, it can mutate. And the next variant can be even more dangerous than the few current ones that are popping their heads. So this is these are my final thoughts. As I said, if you have any questions, we are here to help the community.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our program tonight. I want to thank each one of the panelists and each one of the organizers tonight. Thank you to the ARF Eastern Region for continuing to offer the community up-to-date information about the pandemic as we're living through it in our region. Good night, take care, stay safe, and get vaccinated. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. To save ourselves. So these have been desperate times, but I think they have led to great opportunities. And in this regard, I think the future is bright.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Dr. Kojalayan, top that.
Can't. I'll try. First of all, it's been a pleasure working with all of you this past year in every single possible way. We have gone closer, and it's an honor for me. And it's been an honor to serve the Armenian community and answer as much of your questions as I have been able to. I want to say that I am very proud to be a doctor and scientist in this year, because despite everything bad we have seen on the political scene, the war scene in Armenia, we have seen so much bad, people not believing in science or degrading science. But I think on the other side of the coin is how wonderful our scientific minds have been throughout centuries to get us where we are today. The miraculous work of vaccine development that we are lucky worked so quickly. I want to do a couple of points, because this comes to one-on-one people who have called me, and I have seen this happen a lot. It's when it comes to the treatment. I just want to put this in because you guys could be prescribed these medications. For example, you have heard of ivermectin, you have heard of doxycycline, and this has been, as I said, for me, personal experiences from the Armenian community, where they go to an urgent care with COVID-19 and they are being prescribed medications that are not only not going to touch the COVID-19, but could potentially be harmful to you. So if you see a prescription for ivermectin or doxycycline antibiotic from a telehealth visit because you have COVID-19, please do not fill them. And it's my responsibility. I take full responsibility for that. The point I'm making is that there is, it's a little bit of a wild west still 1 year into this. A year ago, yes, we were trying hydroxychloroquine and what have you, because we didn't know how to approach this disease. But now we have so much information, like Dr. Bilezikian said, that we know what works and we know for sure what doesn't work. And if this day and age you are prescribed ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, or doxycycline, then your doctor or PA or nurse practitioner doesn't know what they're doing. Please contact a trusted physician, infectious disease specialist, academic hospital, and APO is always available to help you. Karine alluded to the monoclonal antibody, which is a treatment modality for outpatient before you even get to the hospital. So for those who are of a certain age or have certain comorbidities, they are eligible. Just a reminder, if you do receive monoclonal antibodies as treatment, you cannot get the vaccine for 90 days afterwards. So obviously, if you need it, you get it, but that's going to delay your vaccine, and that's totally fine. And last but not least, as a virologist, I spent my specialty 5 years in an adenovirus lab, and which is the vector being used for the J&J and the AstraZeneca vaccines. So viruses have a special place in my heart, but that doesn't mean that they are not bad news. And this virus is bad news because it is spreading so fast, yes, and it's not killing everyone when it spreads. It's killing haphazardly. So this for us is the biggest nightmare, where if it killed everybody, then it will die with the person it kills. But here it's not killing everybody and it's spreading widespread. And every time it spreads uncontrollably, it can mutate. So Dr. Bilezikian called them the resistant variants. Some people are calling them mutants or scariants. This is what I heard this week. I liked it, scariants. So we don't know how they are going to behave. You might hear a lot of things from South Africa. The vaccine doesn't work. We don't know how they're going to behave. What we know is now. What we know is if we get vaccinated now and we build up our immune system now, we should be ready for any variant. But at the same time, if we do everything and travel uncontrollably, like Larry said, and don't believe that this virus is a problem, the virus can multiply even if in asymptomatic people. As long as it's multiplying, it can mutate. And the next variant can be even more dangerous than the few current ones that are popping their heads. So this is these are my final thoughts. As I said, if you have any questions, we are here to help the community.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our program tonight. I want to thank each one of the panelists and each one of the organizers tonight. Thank you to the ARF Eastern Region for continuing to offer the community up-to-date information about the pandemic as we're living through it in our region. Good night, take care, stay safe, and get vaccinated. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.